Welcome back to Midnight Affair Tales. Thank you for joining us. Jack stood at the door, his Navy SEAL uniform still damp from the rain. He'd just returned from a week-long covert mission in the mountains of Afghanistan. The exhaustion from the mission weighed on him, but what he didn't expect was the weight of the betrayal that would greet him at his front door. He had been through hell, battling insurgents, dodging enemy fire, but nothing could prepare him for the sight before him. Jack opened the door quietly, slipping his boots off, unaware of the storm waiting inside. His mind was still on the mission. He had no idea that his real battle was about to begin at home. But then he heard something that stopped him cold. The soft sound of laughter, the creak of the bed springs. At first he thought it was his imagination. But no, the voices were unmistakable. He could hear her, Vanessa, his wife. The woman he had loved for over a decade, the woman who was supposed to stand by him through thick and thin. The laughter turned into a moan, a sound that cut through the air like a knife. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he froze in place, the pain of realization sinking deep into his chest. The woman he had trusted more than anyone had betrayed him. His mind raced, his hands clenched into fists as the rage began to build inside him. His breathing slowed. Every muscle in his body tensed, but he couldn't move. He heard the unmistakable sound of sheets rustling. Then a voice he recognized all too well. It was the man who had taken what was his. The man's voice was low and seductive. "You don't have to be so quiet, babe. I like it when you moan my name." Jack's blood ran cold. This wasn't a nightmare. This was real. His wife, his Vanessa, was in bed with another man. His thoughts spiraled. How long had this been happening? Why hadn't he seen the signs? He wanted to scream. He wanted to storm in there and beat that man into the ground. But he didn't. Jack stood still, watching through the crack in the door as Vanessa and the man continued their affair. "Why?" Jack whispered under his breath, tears welling up in his eyes, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Why would you do this to me?" His grip on the doorknob tightened, and a sudden rush of emotions overwhelmed him. Betrayal, anger, confusion, but above all, a sense of helplessness. Jack took a slow step backward, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The thought of confronting Vanessa now seemed impossible. What would he say? How would he even begin to process this? Before he could make another move, Vanessa's voice cut through the air, sweet and soft like she was speaking to a lover. "Don't worry, baby, Jack will never find out. He's always so busy with his damn job. He'll never notice." Those words felt like a punch to his gut. His mind flashed back to the days he spent away from her, training, serving, always thinking he was protecting his family. All that time, his wife had been lying to him, betraying him with another man. He turned and walked out, his body numb, the weight of the world crushing him. For the first time in his life, Jack had no idea what to do next. All he could think of was the destruction Vanessa had caused in his life. It wasn't just a marriage that was broken, it was his heart, his family, and his identity. And one thing was clear, this wouldn't end quietly. Jack needed to get out. His body and mind screamed for a release from the overwhelming wave of emotions that had hit him. The military base was familiar, safe. It was a place where he could put on his uniform, focus on the mission, and forget about everything else. But no matter how far he ran, the picture of Vanessa's face, her betrayal, was burned into his memory. He stepped into his office at the Navy base, trying to breathe through the sting of the pain still lingering. His mind told him to focus on the mission, to think of nothing but the job at hand. But every time he closed his eyes, all he could see was Vanessa's smile, the way she touched the man in bed. "Jack!" A voice snapped him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see Commander Harris, his superior officer, standing in the doorway. Harris had known Jack for years, and his eyes flicked between Jack's hollow expression and the file in his hand. "We've got a new operation. Need you to head out. We're on a tight deadline. I know it's been rough with your personal situation, but we could use your expertise." The words hung in the air for a moment, but Jack didn't react. The pain was still there, gnawing at him, but he couldn't afford to show it. His personal life had already crumbled, and the only thing left was to focus on his duty. He nodded sharply, pushing his emotions aside. "Understood, sir," Jack replied, his voice sounding colder than he intended. Harris raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. He handed Jack the file. "Get ready. It's going to be a long few weeks." As Jack studied the operation details, A part of him hoped the mission would give him the break he desperately needed. A chance to escape the constant reminder of Vanessa's betrayal. The adrenaline rush of military missions was his only form of release now. But as Jack prepared for departure, another thought plagued his mind: revenge. The seed had already been planted, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the anger festering inside him. If he couldn't get answers from Vanessa, he would find them elsewhere. The mission was over. Jack had done his job with precision as he always did. The days spent in the field felt like a brief distraction. His mind never strayed too far from the thought of Vanessa's betrayal. The anger continued to simmer under the surface, eating away at him like a slow burn. His thoughts were consumed with one question: why? Jack hadn't spoken to Vanessa since that night, but he knew it was time to confront her. He couldn't keep running from the truth. She owed him an explanation. The house felt colder when he walked through the door, a stark contrast to the warmth he used to feel. Vanessa was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. She didn't even glance up when Jack entered. He closed the door with a soft thud and stood there for a moment, gathering his thoughts. There was so much he wanted to say, but he wasn't sure where to begin. Vanessa finally looked up, her face a mask of guilt and defiance. "You're home early." Jack's gaze hardened, his voice icy. "I need answers, Vanessa. What the hell was that last night? Who is he?" Vanessa flinched but quickly regained her composure. "Jack, please, we can talk about this calmly." "Calmly? After everything?" His heart pounded as the anger began to rise. "Calmly?" he repeated, his voice growing louder. "You think I can just let this slide? After everything we've been through, you thought I wouldn't find out?" She looked away, tears welling in her eyes, but Jack wasn't ready for her tears. "You've destroyed everything. Do you even care?" Vanessa's lip trembled. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened, Jack." Jack took a step forward, fists clenched, the raw emotion threatening to explode. "It just happened? You've been lying to me for how long? Who is he?" Her eyes flicked nervously to the side. "His name is Marcus. I didn't mean to hurt you, but—" Jack cut her off. "Don't you dare say you didn't mean to hurt me. You've been sleeping with another man behind my back. Do you think that's something I can just forget?" Vanessa stood up, her voice shaking. "I didn't want to hurt you, Jack. I love you. But things were different." Jack looked at her, his heart heavy with pain. "You don't love me." He paused, the words tasting like acid in his mouth. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." Vanessa's tears fell freely now. "I'm sorry." The pain of her words hit harder than any enemy he had ever faced. But Jack knew one thing for sure now: this was just the beginning. There was no going back. Jack had never felt this way before. The entire world seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Every step he took felt heavier than the last. The house was silent after his confrontation with Vanessa, the air thick with the tension of words unsaid and feelings unexpressed. But Jack couldn't stand the silence any longer. Vanessa's betrayal had broken him in a way he couldn't explain, but what hurt the most was the uncertainty. Was she lying? Was Marcus really just a mistake? Or was there something more? As he sat on the couch, his thoughts swirled like a storm. He knew he couldn't just let this go. He had to uncover the truth, even if it meant digging into places he didn't want to go. But the more he thought about it, the more it became clear that he couldn't trust her anymore. Not after what she did. His fingers clenched around the phone. His mind raced with 100 possible actions, stalking Marcus, confronting him, even getting his hands dirty, but he stopped himself. He couldn't let anger control him. This wasn't about the man. It was about Vanessa. He needed to know the truth. Jack grabbed his keys and headed for his car. The streets of the city blurred as his mind focused on the one thing he couldn't shake: the need for closure. He drove to the place where Vanessa had told him she was working late the previous night. The office building stood like a looming shadow in the night. His instincts kicked in. He approached the entrance, glancing at the security guard. The man looked up but didn't say anything. Jack had worked enough covert operations to know how to get past small obstacles. He walked up to the door, his heart beating loudly in his chest. Inside, the office was dark and empty. He made his way through the maze of cubicles, trying to keep his movements quiet. Then he saw it. A discarded piece of paper on a desk. A name scribbled in hurried handwriting. Marcus. Jack's breath hitched. This was it, the confirmation he needed. Vanessa wasn't just cheating. she was living a double life. The following days were a blur of rage and confusion. Jack's thoughts consumed him, swirling in endless circles as he tried to come to terms with what Vanessa had done. The phone call he overheard, her whispers, her promises to Marcus, echoed in his mind like a broken record. And every time he closed his eyes, the image of them together haunted him. But there was a new feeling rising inside him now. Something sharper than anger. Something colder. Revenge. Jack didn't just want to confront her. He didn't just want to end the marriage. He needed to make her feel the way he felt. Betrayed. Broken. Humiliated. As the days dragged on, Jack's plan began to take shape. He needed to get closer to Marcus, find out everything he could. He had to know if this affair was truly a secret or if there was more to it. He needed to see how deep Vanessa's lies went. The first step was to contact an old friend, someone he trusted in the intelligence field. A man who had helped him with covert operations in the past. Jack sent the message late at night, his fingers trembling as he typed the request. Within hours, a response came through. Marcus lives in an upscale apartment downtown. No known criminal history, but there's something off about him. Jack didn't hesitate. He got in his car and drove to the apartment building, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The first step toward the reckoning he had been dreaming of. As he parked outside the building, he watched Marcus enter the building. Jack's breath caught. This man, the one who had been sharing a bed with his wife, was just a few feet away from him. The anger surged, but Jack held back. This wasn't the time for a confrontation. This was just the beginning. The first move was done. Now he needed to get close to Marcus. And once he had all the pieces of the puzzle, Vanessa would finally know what it felt like to lose everything. Days turned into weeks and Jack's obsession grew. Every moment of every day, his mind was consumed with the plan. He followed Marcus, watched him, gathered intel. He had to learn everything about the man who had stolen his wife's heart, everything that would make his revenge sweet. Jack was no stranger to the darkness inside him. As a Navy SEAL, he had been trained to push emotions aside, to stay focused on the mission at hand. But now, the lines between duty and personal pain were blurred. Revenge wasn't just something he wanted, it was something he craved. One night, Jack found Marcus at a bar. He wasn't the type to frequent places like this, but tonight was different. He needed information. Jack had learned to play the game over the years. He walked into the bar with a calm demeanor, scanning the room for his target. Marcus was sitting at a corner booth, his back turned. Jack took a deep breath and approached him. He was no longer the broken man who had walked into his house weeks ago. He was a man on a mission. As Jack slid into the booth opposite Marcus, the man looked up in surprise. His eyes scanned Jack quickly, taking in his demeanor, his posture. The look on his face showed no sign of recognition. That was good. It meant Marcus didn't know who Jack was yet. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus asked, his voice defensive. Jack smiled, his tone smooth. "I'm just a guy who wants to know why you're messing with my life." Marcus stiffened, eyes narrowing. "What the hell are you talking about?" Jack leaned in closer, his eyes locking onto Marcus's. "I'm talking about Vanessa. You're the one she's been sleeping with, aren't you?" For a split second, Marcus's confidence wavered. Jack noticed it, just enough to know that the man was hiding something. "You're crazy," Marcus snapped, but Jack could see the lie in his eyes. Jack leaned back in his seat, his grin cold and calculated. "You know, I don't like being lied to. So why don't you tell me the truth?" There was a long silence between them. Marcus was sweating now, the tension palpable. Jack could feel the power shifting in his favor. This was the beginning. Jack had Marcus exactly where he wanted him. The storm was building and soon it would break. The next day, Jack felt a strange calmness settle over him. He wasn't angry anymore. That emotion had been burned away by the growing desire for vengeance. Now he was more focused, methodical even. He knew exactly what he needed to do. His eyes were set on Marcus. He had already done his homework, piecing together every bit of information. Marcus had a routine. Every morning he stopped at a local coffee shop, then went to work at a nearby financial firm. Jack began to shadow him more closely now, watching from the shadows, taking mental notes of every move. The details mattered. Every moment, every glance was a piece of the puzzle. Jack had become an expert in observation. As a SEAL, he was trained to stay hidden, to gather intel without being seen. Today was no different. He sat in his car, parked across the street from the coffee shop, his eyes locked on Marcus as he walked in. Jack's fingers tapped against the steering wheel, a mix of impatience and satisfaction simmering inside him. He knew that revenge wasn't just about getting even. It was about making the other person feel the weight of their actions. Marcus had no idea who was watching him, who was learning his every move. The game was being set up perfectly. Jack's phone buzzed. It was a message from his old intelligence contact. Marcus had an affair before. Same pattern. He doesn't last long with women. The message hit Jack like a shot to the chest. It wasn't just that Marcus was a cheater, it was that he had done this before. He had a history. This wasn't just about Vanessa anymore. It was about taking down a man who thought he could get away with everything. Jack's thoughts turned darker as he stared at the figure of Marcus through his rearview mirror. Soon you'll pay for everything you've done, Marcus. A week passed. Jack's patience was paying off. He had carefully watched Marcus, tracked his patterns, and even gotten close enough to learn where he lived. But now it was time to make a move. He couldn't just stalk him forever. He needed to get closer, too close for comfort. It was early evening when Jack finally made his decision. He had gathered enough information. It was time to take action, to force Marcus into a position where he couldn't lie his way out. Jack had arranged a meeting under the guise of a business opportunity. He used his old contacts to set up a dinner at a fancy restaurant, one Marcus frequented. Jack knew how to play the game. He had always been good at getting people to trust him, to let their guard down. And tonight Marcus would be no different. Jack wore a sharp suit, blending into the high-class surroundings with ease. He waited by the bar, his eyes scanning the room. It didn't take long before Marcus walked in, wearing his usual air of confidence, oblivious to the danger lurking right in front of him. Their eyes met, and Marcus hesitated for a second. Jack smiled, a genuine grin hiding the storm inside him. "Marcus," Jack said smoothly, stepping forward. "I'm glad you could make it." Marcus looked confused, his eyebrows furrowing. "I don't know you, man." "Oh, but you will," Jack replied, his tone chilling. "You and I have a lot in common." Marcus still didn't catch on. "What the hell are you talking about?" Jack leaned in, his voice low but steady. "I'm talking about your affair with Vanessa. How long did you think you could get away with it?" The shock that flashed across Marcus's face was exactly what Jack had hoped for. For a moment Marcus couldn't speak. He was caught, his confidence slipping away. "You're insane," Marcus finally sputtered, trying to recover. "You don't know what you're talking about." Jack sat back, unbothered. "You think this is all a joke? That you can just play with people's lives and walk away unscathed? I'm not here for your lies, Marcus." Marcus leaned forward now, his anger rising. "You don't know anything about me or her. You don't know what I've been through." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I think I do. I've watched you. I've listened to you. And I know everything." The confrontation in the restaurant was just the beginning. Marcus didn't back down easily, but Jack had already won. The seed of fear had been planted in Marcus's mind, and now he was playing a different game. Jack wasn't interested in talking anymore. This wasn't about words. This was about action, about making Marcus feel the weight of his actions. Over the next few days, Jack intensified his efforts. He started reaching out to people from Marcus's past, digging into his history. What he found was troubling. Marcus had a pattern. He wasn't just a man who cheated on his wife. He was a man who destroyed lives, who moved on without any remorse. But Jack wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. It was a late night when Jack stood in front of his apartment door, his hands clenched into fists. The sound of the lock clicking open brought him back to reality. Vanessa was inside. The woman who had betrayed him, the woman who had promised to love him forever. Jack had spent so long chasing revenge that he had forgotten about the other part of this equation. The woman who had torn his heart to pieces. He walked inside, his footsteps quiet. He didn't want to hear excuses. He didn't want to hear her pleas. But when he saw her sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen from crying, something inside him shifted. This wasn't how he'd imagined it would go. Revenge had always seemed so sweet in theory, but standing here, staring at the woman who had once been his everything, Jack felt nothing. Vanessa looked up, her face filled with regret. "Jack, He cut her off. "Save it." Her voice trembled. "Please just listen. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you. Jack's heart ached at her words, but his resolve didn't waver. You made a choice, Vanessa. A choice that changed everything. And now we both have to live with the consequences. Jack's heart was still numb as he walked away from Vanessa. He couldn't afford to feel sorry for her, not anymore. His focus was entirely on one thing now, Marcus. The plan was set in motion. Jack's next move would be calculated, a direct strike against the man who had destroyed his family. Revenge wasn't just an impulse, it was a method, a series of steps that would leave Marcus no room to breathe. Jack had spent hours researching Marcus's business. The man wasn't just a cheater, he had a reputation in the corporate world. He was ambitious, ruthless, and ready to destroy anyone who stood in his way. But Jack wasn't afraid of that. The higher Marcus climbed, the harder he would fall. His phone buzzed. It was a reminder of the dinner meeting scheduled with one of Marcus's old associates. Jack had already set everything in place. He would get Marcus in the same room, put him under pressure, and watch as the facade he had built crumbled. But before he could make the call to finalize things, a thought crossed his mind. The lies Marcus had told, did they go deeper than just the affair? Were there other people he had hurt along the way? Jack's gut told him that Marcus was hiding more. And Jack wasn't going to stop until he uncovered every last detail. Every lie. Every betrayal. I'm coming for you, Marcus. And this time, you won't be able to lie your way out. The meeting was everything Jack had planned for. He arrived early, slipping into the restaurant like a shadow, ensuring every move was calculated. He had dressed in a suit, but there was nothing casual about his demeanor. Jack was here for business. Nothing more, nothing less. The associate Marcus had once worked with, a man named Harold, greeted him at the table. Jack had done his homework on Harold too. This man wasn't just a business partner. He was a key to unraveling Marcus's empire. Mr. Novak, Harold said, offering a handshake. Jack shook it firmly, maintaining eye contact. The message was clear. Jack wasn't here to waste time. Call me Jack, he replied, sitting down across from Harold. The waiter appeared almost immediately, but Jack wasn't here for the menu. Let's get to business, he said, his voice sharp. Harold hesitated, sensing the tension in the air. Of course. What's on your mind? Jack leaned in slightly. I know about Marcus, he said quietly, watching for a reaction. Harold's face froze. What do you mean? I know about the affair. And I know he's done worse. Jack's eyes narrowed, speaking in low, deliberate tones. The question is, are you in on it? Harold's eyes flickered for a moment and Jack saw the shift. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, clearly nervous. But Jack wasn't backing down. I have a lot of resources, Harold. If you want to keep your secrets safe, you'll help me get to Marcus. Harold tried to compose himself. What do you want from me? Jack smiled faintly. I need you to introduce me to him. I'm going to make sure he knows what it feels like to lose everything. The tension at the table was thick. Jack's eyes never left Harold's face, watching for any sign of hesitation. Finally, after a long silence, Harold nodded. All right, he whispered. I'll set it up. Jack's lips curled into a grim smile. The trap was set. The endgame had officially begun. The following week, Jack found himself sitting across from Marcus in a small, upscale conference room. The atmosphere was charged, the air thick with anticipation. Marcus had no idea what he was walking into. Jack had set everything up perfectly. Harold had made the introduction, and now Marcus was here, looking relaxed, confident, even smug. He still didn't understand what was about to hit him. So, Jack, Marcus said with a half smile, leaning back in his chair. Harold tells me you're someone I should be worried about. I'm curious, what exactly do you want? Jack didn't waste any time. I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything. To watch everything you've built crumble around you. Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. You think you can scare me? Jack leaned in, his voice cold and calculated. I don't think I can scare you, Marcus. I know I can. You've hurt people, taken lives, broken hearts, and for what? Your own ego. Marcus laughed, but it was strained. You don't know anything about me. Wrong? Jack shot back. I know everything. I know about the affair with Vanessa, how you played her for months. I know how you've been playing everyone around you, Harold, your business partners, even your own family. And now you've crossed the wrong line. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The confidence he had shown earlier was starting to crack. "You're nothing but a small-time player, Jack. You're not going to ruin me." Jack smiled, a cold, sharp smile that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "Oh, I'm not trying to ruin you, Marcus. I'm here to watch you destroy yourself. You've made your bed and now you'll lie in it." The words hung in the air, heavy with the promise of what was to come. Marcus's face paled, and Jack could almost hear the panic rising in his voice. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Marcus spat, his voice rising. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Jack replied, his tone unwavering. "And I'm not going anywhere until you're the one who loses everything." The next day Jack was on edge. His conversation with Marcus had shaken him, but he wasn't going to let it show. He had to remain calm, precise. He couldn't afford any slip-ups. The plan was in motion, but there were too many variables. Too many ways Marcus could slip through his fingers. Jack sat in his office, staring at the folder in front of him. Inside were all the documents he'd collected about Marcus. The affair was only the beginning. There were business deals, contracts, and shady transactions that were just waiting to be exposed. Marcus had built his empire on lies, but Jack had the truth, and the truth was about to bring him down. His phone buzzed. It was Harold. "Jack." Harold's voice crackled through the speaker. "I got some information for you. Marcus is planning something big. I don't know the details yet, but it's coming soon." Jack's stomach churned. "What kind of big?" "I don't know," Harold replied. "But if you're serious about taking him down, you need to act fast." Jack leaned forward in his chair, his mind racing. If Marcus was planning something big, it could be his final move. A move that would put everything at risk. Jack couldn't afford to wait. He had to act now. "I'll be in touch," Jack said, hanging up the phone. He stood up, grabbing his jacket and walking toward the door. It was time to take the next step. Marcus had no idea what was coming. But Jack was ready. He wasn't going to stop until he saw Marcus fall. The plan was set. Jack had arranged to meet with Marcus at a secluded location, an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The place was perfect, isolated, quiet, and full of shadows. It would be the perfect backdrop for Jack's next move. He arrived early, keeping his distance and watching the road for any sign of Marcus. His heart raced. This was it, the confrontation. The moment when everything changed. Minutes later, Marcus's sleek black SUV pulled into the lot. Jack's eyes narrowed as he watched Marcus step out, his usual cocky grin plastered on his face. The man didn't have a clue that everything he'd worked for was on the verge of crumbling. Marcus walked toward Jack, his hands in his pockets. "You actually showed up," he said, sounding almost impressed. "I thought for sure you'd chicken out." Jack didn't flinch. "I'm not here to talk, Marcus. I'm here to end this." Marcus chuckled. "You're a fool if you think you can take me down, Jack. You're out of your league." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he motioned toward the building behind them. "You think you're in control? You've been playing everyone, Vanessa, Harold, your partners. But I'm the one calling the shots now. And I'm not going to let you destroy any more lives." For a brief moment, Marcus's smile faltered. Jack saw the fear flicker in his eyes, and it was almost enough to make him smile. But he held it in. This was far from over. "What do you want?" Marcus demanded, his tone turning colder. Jack stepped closer. "I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything. To watch everything you've built burn to the ground." Marcus's face darkened. "You're delusional. You're going to regret this." Jack's response was simple. "We'll see about that." The following days were a blur of tension. Jack felt the weight of his plan settling on his shoulders, but he knew there was no turning back now. Marcus was beginning to realize just how much danger he was in. His cocky demeanor was slipping, replaced by a frantic energy that only confirmed how close Jack was to breaking him. Jack had managed to get his hands on some damning information. Proof of Marcus's illegal dealings, documents that could destroy him. But Jack wasn't going to use them just yet. He had one last card to play. It was time to hit where it would hurt the most. Marcus's family. Jack's phone rang again. It was Vanessa. "Jack, I don't know what you're doing, but please stop. This isn't you. You don't want to go down this path." Jack's grip on the phone tightened. He wanted to hang up, but instead he took a deep breath. "You don't get it, do you?" Jack's voice was low, almost a whisper. "This isn't just about me. It's about our daughter. It's about the lies he's been telling. I'm not letting him destroy us. I can't let him keep getting away with it. I know you're hurt, Vanessa said, her voice breaking. But this isn't the way. You're better than this. Jack closed his eyes, feeling a sharp pang of guilt. But it quickly faded. There was no turning back. He had made his choice. I have to finish this, he replied, his voice colder than before. Vanessa was silent for a moment before speaking again. Then do it, Jack. But don't lose yourself in the process. Jack hung up without replying. He couldn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. Marcus had crossed the line, and now it was time for the final move. The night air was thick with tension. Jack sat alone in his car, parked just outside Marcus's estate, his heart pounding in his chest. The final confrontation was coming, but something in him felt uneasy. His mind raced with the consequences of what he was about to do. Was this truly the only way? Was revenge really worth losing himself? He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. Focus, Jack. You've come this far. In the distance he saw Marcus's mansion, glowing like a beacon in the dark. But inside, it wasn't the light that illuminated the house. It was the lies, the deceit, the betrayal that had been eating away at Jack's soul for months. He had to end it. He had to take Marcus down no matter the cost. Suddenly his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Harold. I know you're planning something big tonight. Don't forget you're not alone in this. Jack read it once, twice, but the words barely registered. He wasn't thinking about Harold or anyone else. This wasn't a team mission. This was personal. The woman I loved chose him over me. And now I'm going to make him pay. He slammed the car door, stepping out into the cold night. As he approached the front gate of the mansion, he could hear the sounds of laughter and music from inside. The party was in full swing. He took a deep breath, adjusting his jacket as he stepped past the gate. Tonight it would all end. Marcus was inside the mansion, surrounded by his closest associates, making plans for the future. He looked untouchable, sitting comfortably at the top, far removed from the consequences of his actions. But Jack wasn't intimidated. He had the evidence, the leverage. It was time to bring it all to light. As Jack slipped past the security guards unnoticed, his mind raced. You don't know what's coming, Marcus? Not yet. He found his way into the private office where Marcus spent most of his time. Jack didn't knock. He just walked in, the door creaking open. Marcus's head shot up, his eyes widening in shock. What the hell are you doing here? His voice was sharp, defensive. Jack smirked, his face cold. Did you really think you could get away with all this? With Vanessa? With everything you've done? Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You don't know what you're talking about. Get out of here before I... Jack took a step forward, cutting him off. Before you what? You've already ruined enough lives. You've destroyed everything I cared about. It's time for you to pay. Marcus took a few steps back, clearly rattled. But Jack could see it in his eyes. The fear was starting to set in. What do you want? Marcus demanded, his voice shaking slightly now. Jack's eyes burned with a cold fury. Everything. Your empire. Your reputation. Your freedom. I want it all to crumble. Marcus tried to compose himself. You can't do this. You don't have the power. Jack leaned in closer, his voice low and dangerous. Don't mistake me, Marcus. I've been planning this for months. You just don't know it yet. The tension was unbearable as Jack stood there, his heart beating hard against his chest. Marcus's arrogance was slowly fading, replaced by panic. Jack's every word seemed to tear away at his carefully constructed world. But Jack wasn't done. Not yet. He pulled out the folder from his jacket, thick with damning evidence, contracts, and photos that would destroy Marcus in an instant. As he placed it on the desk, Marcus's eyes widened in horror. No. Marcus gasped, stumbling back. You can't have this. Oh, I can, Jack replied, his voice dripping with satisfaction. And now it's time to show everyone who you really are. It's time to watch everything you've built burn to the ground. Marcus's face twisted with rage. You're going to regret this, Jack. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Jack chuckled darkly. I think I do. But what you don't understand is that your time is up. You can't control everything anymore. Not after what you've done. Suddenly, the door to the office swung open and Harold walked in, his expression tense. Jack, he said urgently. We've got company. The cops are on their way. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He'd expected this to be the final blow, not a race against time. But now he had no choice. He had to make it count. "Get out of here now," Jack hissed at Marcus, his voice low but urgent. As Marcus stumbled back, Jack grabbed the folder from the desk and turned toward the door, determined to make sure everything would come crashing down, even if he didn't get the chance to finish this face-off. He had one last move and Marcus would not escape this time. Pause right here, amazing listeners. Did you know? Only 10% of people who enjoy these stories actually subscribe. I pour my heart into bringing you incredible stories every single day, and this month I have a big goal: 2,000 subscribers. So, if you love these stories, smash that subscribe button right now and be part of this journey. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. Alright, let's dive back into the story. The sound of police sirens echoed in the distance. Jack's heart thudded heavily in his chest as he darted down the hallway, clutching the folder in his hands. His mind was racing, the implications of what he'd just set in motion weighing heavily on him. This is it, Jack. No turning back now. Harold's warning had been urgent, but Jack had never been the type to run. He wasn't about to let Marcus walk away from this. Not after everything. Not after Vanessa's betrayal. As Jack reached the back exit of the mansion, he saw a black SUV parked near the gate. His breath caught in his throat as Marcus appeared in the shadows, holding a gun. The tension was palpable. This was no longer about revenge. It was about survival. "You're not getting away with this, Jack," Marcus sneered, stepping closer, the gun aimed directly at him. Jack's eyes hardened. "It's you who isn't going to get away with it. Not this time." He moved quickly, ducking behind a large column as Marcus fired a warning shot. The bullet struck the ground near Jack's feet, and he scrambled for cover. God, this is real now. He hadn't anticipated Marcus making a move like this, but there was no time for hesitation. "Drop the folder, Jack," Marcus shouted. "You don't want to do this." "I already have," Jack muttered under his breath, his hand slowly reaching for the small pistol hidden in his jacket. He wasn't about to kill Marcus, not yet. But he needed leverage and he needed to send a message. The tension in the air was thick as both men were at a standstill, Jack with his pistol drawn, Marcus with the gun aimed squarely at him. The sound of sirens grew louder, and Jack could hear the crunch of tires on gravel as police vehicles approached the estate. Marcus's eyes flicked to the horizon as if weighing his options. "You don't know who you're messing with," he growled. "I can make this all go away. I have the power, the money, the connections. You won't even make it out of here alive." Jack kept his stance steady, his finger on the trigger, though his eyes never left Marcus. "You're nothing without your empire, Marcus. And you're about to lose it all. You made a mistake thinking I was just going to walk away." Marcus's smirk faltered, his grip tightening around the gun. He wasn't used to losing control, but now it seemed like he was losing everything. Jack took a breath, letting the silence stretch between them. "This is bigger than you. Bigger than us. You messed with the wrong people. You thought you could destroy my family. Well, I'm about to destroy yours." Marcus's expression twisted with rage. "You don't scare me." But Jack could see the fear flicker in his eyes. Marcus was starting to realize that his world was unraveling. Then, without warning, Jack lunged forward, knocking the gun from Marcus's hand and pushing him to the ground. "You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy everything," Jack spat, looking down at Marcus. "This is the end of your reign, Marcus. You won't get away with it." With a final glance at Marcus's shocked face, Jack sprinted toward the back gate, just as the police arrived. He didn't look back. It was done. The sound of the sirens was deafening as Jack made his way to the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from adrenaline. The standoff with Marcus had shaken him to the core, but it had been necessary. Everything was happening so fast now. He couldn't let himself lose focus. Not now. The folder, the evidence, was clutched tightly in his hands. It wasn't just about taking down Marcus anymore. It was about exposing the truth, bringing everything to light. And it wasn't just for him. It was for Vanessa, for their daughter. As Jack entered the warehouse, he found Harold pacing back and forth, his face tense with worry. "Is it done?" Harold asked, his voice urgent. "It's done," Jack replied. "But it's not over yet. We have to make sure the evidence gets to the right people." Harold nodded, his face grim. You know this could get ugly, right? This isn't just a battle between you and Marcus anymore. It's bigger than that. Jack's eyes narrowed. I know. But I'm not backing down. This ends now. I've lost too much to let this go. As Jack took a seat on an old wooden crate, he ran his fingers through his hair. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the lies, the lost years, felt unbearable. He'd spent so long plotting his revenge that he hadn't taken the time to think about the toll it would take on him. He had set the pieces in motion. The truth would come out. The world would finally know what Marcus had done. But as the silence stretched on in the warehouse, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was looming, just beyond his reach. The sound of the heavy rain pounding on the warehouse roof echoed throughout the empty space. Jack sat in the dim light, his eyes fixed on the folder in front of him. Inside were the details that could finally take Marcus down. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. You still haven't told me everything, Jack, Harold said from the corner, his voice low. What's in that folder? Jack glanced up, his face hardening. Everything. Every shady deal Marcus has ever made. Every lie. Every betrayal. All of it is right here. He slapped the folder onto the wooden crate with a thud, the weight of his words sinking in. Harold stepped forward, his eyes scanning the contents. This could bring the entire organization to its knees. But it also makes you a target. You sure you're ready for this? Jack's jaw tightened. I've been ready for years. Marcus needs to answer for what he's done, for what he's taken from me, from my family. His hands clenched into fists. I'm not walking away from this now. A long silence followed. The truth was out there, but as much as Jack wanted to rush and expose it all, he knew the danger was still lurking. Marcus was dangerous, too dangerous to underestimate. Jack was playing a game of chess, and one wrong move could cost him everything. What's the next move? Harold asked, breaking the silence. Jack stood up and walked toward the old metal table in the corner. His eyes were steely with resolve. We send it to the press. I'll make sure it lands in the right hands. But first... Jack paused. He needed to confront Vanessa. She still didn't know everything. And he was done hiding the truth. The lights of Jack's car flashed through the rain as he pulled up in front of Vanessa's apartment building. His heart pounded in his chest, and his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. This was it. He couldn't keep avoiding the conversation any longer. After everything that had happened, after all the lies, he knew he had to face her. He owed her the truth, even if it tore them apart. Jack pushed open the door of the car and walked toward the building. His footsteps were heavy, each one echoing in the empty night. When he reached her door, he hesitated, his breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure what he expected from her, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. He knocked sharply. There was a long silence before Vanessa finally opened the door. Her face was a mix of exhaustion and confusion. She hadn't expected him, not like this. What are you doing here? Vanessa asked, her voice soft yet guarded. Jack stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk. Her expression hardened as she crossed her arms. About what? Jack swallowed, his throat dry. About everything. About what happened. About Marcus. About us. Vanessa frowned. I don't think I want to hear this right now. Not after everything you've done. The anger in her voice stung more than Jack cared to admit, but he couldn't stop now. He had to tell her everything. He had to explain why he'd pushed her away. He had to make her understand. I didn't want you to be involved, Vanessa. But you were. You were always going to be. I never wanted you to know about the things I've done, but I can't keep this from you anymore. Her eyes softened for a moment, but then the walls went up again. What are you saying, Jack? I'm saying that Marcus is behind all of it. The affairs, the lies, the manipulation. And you were just a pawn. But I can't let it go anymore. I won't. Vanessa's eyes widened. What? No. You're lying. Jack took a deep breath and pulled the folder from his jacket, tossing it onto the coffee table. I'm not lying, Vanessa. I've been trying to protect you from all this, but I can't anymore. I'm going after him. And I'm taking him down. This ends now. The silence between them was thick as Vanessa stared at the folder. She opened it slowly, scanning the pages. Her face went pale as she realized the gravity of everything Jack had just said. This is insane, Vanessa whispered almost to herself. You really think you can bring him down? Jack looked her square in the eye. I don't think. I know. The next few days were a blur. Jack kept moving forward, fueled by his anger and the need for justice. But the weight of his choices, the lies, the betrayal, the cold path he had set for himself, was becoming more evident with every step. Harold had set up the meeting with the press. The folder was being handed over to the right people. Jack had no doubt that Marcus's empire was going to collapse. But what came after that? The more Jack thought about it, the more he realized just how much he had sacrificed. His marriage was over. His family was shattered. And in the end it was all because of one man's greed. As Jack sat in his apartment, alone with his thoughts, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Vanessa. "We need to talk." He stared at the screen for a long moment. What was left to say? The truth had come out. It was too late to go back. Jack wasn't sure what Vanessa expected from him, but he knew one thing. Whatever came next, there would be no turning back for any of them. The final battle was approaching. Marcus had underestimated him. And now Jack was about to make him pay. Jack stood in front of the tall glass windows of his apartment, watching the city lights flicker through the rain. He couldn't shake the image of Vanessa's face when he had told her the truth. The shock, the hurt, and that lingering look of betrayal. It was like he had broken everything he cared about. But the mission couldn't stop. It was bigger than him now. Marcus had been using people, destroying lives without care. He had to make sure the people who had been hurt got the justice they deserved. And Jack was the one to give it to them. The phone rang, slicing through his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was Harold. "Jack, we're in position. The story is set to break in 24 hours, Harold said, his voice crisp and professional, but there was an edge to it. "Are you ready for this?" Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. "I've never been more ready." The silence on the other end of the line was filled with unspoken understanding. Both men knew that once the story was out, Marcus's life as he knew it would be over. The organization would crumble, the dirty deals exposed. But Jack also knew it wasn't going to end there. Marcus was dangerous, and there would be hell to pay for what Jack had just set into motion. Jack clenched his jaw. "One more thing. I'm taking him down myself." Harold paused. "You're going after Marcus?" "I have to. This is personal now." There was a long silence before Harold replied, his voice firm. "Be careful, Jack. He's not going to go down without a fight." "I know. But neither am I." The air was thick with tension as Jack walked down the deserted alley, his boots clicking against the wet concrete. His mind raced, every scenario playing out in his head. Marcus was cornered now, trapped by the truth, by the evidence Jack had uncovered. But there was something that still gnawed at him. What if Marcus had one final trick up his sleeve? Jack had played this game for too long to think it would end without more bloodshed. Marcus wasn't just a man. He was a beast who'd made his fortune on others' pain. And beasts didn't go down easily. As Jack approached the abandoned building where they had arranged to meet, his heart beat in his chest like a drum. He'd set this up with Harold, but Jack knew the real trap wasn't just about exposing Marcus. It was about Marcus thinking he had the upper hand, underestimating Jack's resolve. He stepped into the dimly lit building, every shadow seeming to conceal a threat. The silence was oppressive. Jack's hand hovered over the gun tucked in his waistband, ready for anything. Then a voice cut through the silence. "You think you're going to walk away from this, Jack?" Marcus stepped into the light, his grin twisted with malicious amusement. He had always been too confident, too sure of himself. But Jack could see the fear behind his eyes. The fear of losing everything he had built. "This isn't over," Marcus continued, his voice cold. "You may have won the battle, but I'm still here. I still control everything. Your revenge won't mean a thing." Jack didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his gaze unyielding. "You're wrong. It's over now. And you're going to pay for every life you've destroyed." Marcus's eyes darkened. "You think exposing me to the press will make a difference? You think they'll believe your lies?" Jack's lips curled into a slight, almost sad smile. "They'll believe everything. Because they won't have a choice. It's all in there." He gestured to the folder in his hand, holding it up. "The proof. The story you can't escape from." Marcus's face twisted into a mask of rage. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Actually," Jack said, his voice low, "I think I do." The sound of the rain hitting the pavement was deafening as Jack and Marcus faced each other in the cold, empty warehouse. The tension between them crackled, thick with the anticipation of what was about to happen. Jack's fingers tightened around the folder, its contents the key to everything he had worked for. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. About taking down the man who had hurt so many people, including him and his family. "You don't get it, do you, Jack?" Marcus said, his voice low but full of venom. "You think you can bring me down with a few documents? You think you've won because you've exposed the truth?" Jack's eyes were hard. "You'll never understand, will you? It's not just about the truth. It's about everything you've done. Every life you've ruined. Every person you've discarded like they don't matter. This is for them." Marcus laughed bitterly. "You're a fool. You can't stop me. I'll burn it all to the ground before you get your way." Jack took a slow step forward, never breaking eye contact. "You already have, Marcus. But this time I'm the one who's going to burn you." The next few moments felt like slow motion. Jack moved, fast and deliberate, his hand reaching for the gun at his side. Marcus lunged, but it was too late. Jack had already made his move. With a deafening bang, the warehouse filled with the sound of gunfire. Everything went quiet. Jack stood there, his breath heavy in the silence. He couldn't believe it had come to this. But there was no turning back now. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Jack stood motionless, his gun still in hand, eyes fixed on Marcus's body sprawled across the cold concrete floor. The smoke from the gunshot lingered in the air, sharp and acrid. His heart was racing, but his mind was strangely calm, as if this was what he had been prepared for all along. The reality of the moment hit him like a brick. Marcus was gone. But the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The chaos that Marcus had left behind would take more than just a bullet to fix. Jack had killed a monster, but the system was still broken. The people who had been affected by Marcus's empire would still need answers. He could feel the weight of that responsibility like a stone in his chest. He dropped the gun to his side and walked slowly toward the desk, his eyes landing on the folder that contained all the proof, all the corruption that had allowed Marcus to wreak havoc for so long. He picked it up, his fingers grazing the edges of the paper, but it didn't bring him the satisfaction he had hoped for. "No one's going to care," Jack whispered to himself. "The system's too far gone." But then a thought struck him. Maybe that's why he had to do this. Maybe the whole world had to see just how deep the rot went. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about creating change, exposing the truth. And he was the one who would make sure that truth reached every corner of the world. He grabbed his phone and dialed Harold's number. The line rang once, twice. "Jack, you did it?" Harold's voice was tight, the tension in his words clear. "I did it," Jack replied. "But it's not over yet. We need to make sure this gets out. All of it. The story, the evidence. Everything." Harold was silent for a moment. "I'll make the call. It'll go live in an hour." Jack felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. But as he hung up, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The truth was coming and there was no turning back. The room was filled with the buzz of reporters, cameras flashing as they scrambled to piece together the details of the biggest story in years. The headline was bold, clear, undeniable. "Navy SEAL takes down crime lord, exposes global corruption." It was the kind of story that would change the world, but Jack wasn't there to witness it. He couldn't afford to be. He wasn't the hero in this story, not in the way the world would paint him. No, he was just a man who had been pushed too far, who had seen too much, and had taken matters into his own hands. He was already moving on to the next phase of his mission, tracking down the others who had been complicit in Marcus's empire. They had to pay too. Jack had always believed in justice, but he knew it wasn't always clean, it wasn't always easy. Sometimes you had to break the system to fix it. But what hurt more than anything was the thought of what his actions had cost him. His family. Vanessa, his daughter, the people who trusted him. He knew he had hurt them, that he had lost them in the chaos. No matter how much he tried to convince himself that this was the only way, he couldn't escape the emptiness that gnawed at his gut. Jack took a deep breath and turned away from the TV, where the newscasters were now covering the fallout. He needed to focus. The job wasn't done yet. "Time to finish this," he muttered to himself. The knock on his door came late, when the shadows had long since swallowed the city. Jack didn't need to check the peephole, he already knew who it was. Vanessa stood in the doorway, her face pale, eyes wide with worry. She was still the same woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago, But there was something different about her now. The weight of their past, the lies, the betrayal, it hung between them like an invisible wall. "I need to talk to you, Jack," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "I didn't know. About Marcus. I had no idea what was going on." Jack didn't say anything at first. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to feel. Anger? Sadness? Disappointment? All of it swirled together in a toxic mix that threatened to overwhelm him. "Why didn't you tell me, Vanessa?" His voice was rough, strained. "Why didn't you say anything when you found out?" She lowered her eyes, biting her lip. "I didn't know what to say. I was scared, Jack. I thought you were dead. And when you came back, I didn't know how to tell you the truth about what happened." Jack stepped back, rubbing his temples. The truth. It always came back to that. He had spent years believing in the truth, fighting for it, only to have it crumble in his hands. "I was trying to protect you, Jack," Vanessa whispered. "From everything. From the darkness that I knew was swallowing me whole." There was a long silence before Jack spoke again, his voice raw with emotion. "You can't protect me from the truth, Vanessa. Not anymore." She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his arm. "I know I messed up. I know. But please, let me help. Let me make it right." Jack looked at her, seeing the pain in her eyes, the regret. And for the first time in a long while, he wondered if there was a way to rebuild everything that had been destroyed. But then he remembered Marcus and everything that had led to this moment. The past couldn't be undone. But maybe, just maybe, the future could still be salvaged. Jack pulled away from her touch. "I can't make any promises, Vanessa. But I'll think about it." The city felt different that night. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the streets themselves could sense the storm that was about to hit. Jack sat in the dim light of his apartment, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. He had lost so much already, and yet, every step forward felt like a battle. Vanessa's face haunted him. The guilt, the anger, the betrayal, it was all too much to carry. And now, with the world watching him, Jack knew that he couldn't afford to make another mistake. He had to finish what he started. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room. His phone buzzed on the table, pulling his attention back to reality. It was Harold. "Jack, you've got a problem," Harold said, his voice strained. "We've been getting reports of a hit on one of the key witnesses. Someone's trying to clean up the mess, and that means they're coming after you." Jack's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Who is it?" "It's someone close to Marcus," Harold said. "A former associate. But we don't know who they are yet. They're moving fast." Jack's pulse quickened. He was no longer just a man on a mission, he was now a target. But he wasn't going to back down. Not now. "I'll take care of it," Jack said, hanging up before Harold could respond. As he grabbed his jacket and gun, his thoughts raced. Marcus might be gone, but the shadows of his empire still lingered. Jack was about to go to war, but this time it would be on his terms. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the headlights of Jack's car as he sped down the empty highway. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, trying to piece together the puzzle that had led him to this moment. The phone call from Harold had set things in motion, but it wasn't just about the threat on his life anymore. It was about the people who had been hurt by Marcus and the others in his world. And then there was Vanessa. She was still on his mind, still haunting him like a ghost. Could he trust her again? Would things ever be the same between them? The truth was, Jack didn't have the answers. All he knew was that he had to finish this fight. For himself. For his daughter. For everyone who had suffered because of Marcus. His car skidded to a halt outside a rundown warehouse, the place where he believed the next piece of the puzzle would fall into place. The lights flickered above, casting eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. Jack stepped out of the car, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Inside, the air was thick with tension. His footsteps echoed as he moved through the darkened halls, his senses on high alert. He had learned long ago that in a world like this, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Jack pushed open a door, and what he saw froze him in place. "Jack," a voice called from the shadows. It was someone he didn't expect. A man he had once trusted. And in that moment, the last of the walls around his heart crumbled. Betrayal had found him again. "Why, Jason?" Jack's voice was barely a whisper, but it hit like a punch to the gut. His former partner stood before him, a grim look on his face, the gun in his hand aimed directly at Jack's chest. "You never really understood, did you?" Jason said, his eyes cold. This isn't about right and wrong, Jack. It's about power. Survival. We did what we had to do to stay alive. But you've been playing this hero game, pretending like there's some kind of moral high ground. There isn't. Jack felt the familiar sting of betrayal cut through him again, deeper than before. Jason had been a brother to him. They had fought side by side in countless battles, trusted each other with their lives. But now Jack saw him for what he truly was. A coward, a man who would do anything to protect himself, even if it meant destroying everything Jack had worked for. "You've crossed the line, Jason," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "And I'm not going to let you destroy everything I've built." Jason's lips curled into a half-smile, and then he took a step forward. "You don't have a choice. You're alone now, Jack. It's over." Before Jack could react, the sound of gunfire rang out, echoing through the warehouse. Jason staggered back, clutching his side, but he didn't fall. His eyes widened in shock as he looked at Jack. "You?" Jason gasped, pain and disbelief in his voice. "Get down?" Jack shouted, grabbing him by the collar and dragging him behind a stack of crates. The bullet had come from somewhere outside the warehouse. They were not alone. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Jack knew time was running out. He pulled Jason behind the crates, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the warehouse. Whoever was shooting at them wasn't taking any chances. They were close. Jason groaned, clutching his side. Blood seeped through his fingers, but he wasn't dead yet. Jack could hear the desperation in his voice as he spoke. "Jack, we don't have much time," Jason said, his voice weak. "They're going to finish what they started. You need to get out of here." Jack's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. He wasn't about to leave Jason to die, not when he had answers. "Who's after us, Jason?" Jack demanded. "Who sent them?" Jason looked up at him, his face contorting with pain. "You think I can just tell you that now? You're in too deep, Jack. You're playing a game that's way bigger than you. They'll come after you and they won't stop until you're gone." Jack clenched his jaw, frustration boiling inside him. The walls were closing in and he knew he had to make a choice. Run and save himself or fight and finish what he started. Suddenly, the door to the warehouse slammed open and more footsteps followed. This time Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed Jason's arm, pulling him up, and they made a break for it. The odds were against them, but Jack wasn't backing down. He wasn't alone anymore. I hope you've all subscribed by now. Your support means the world. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know that from where you are listening to my stories. I'm excited to hear your feedback and engage with you all. Keep the positivity coming. The cold night air hit Jack like a wall as he and Jason sprinted through the back alley, the sound of footsteps closing in behind them. Jack's heart was pounding, every muscle in his body screaming at him to keep moving. He glanced over at Jason, who was barely keeping up, his injury slowing him down. "We can't stop now," Jack hissed, pulling Jason along with him. "You have to stay conscious, Jason. We need you to talk." Jason grunted in pain but managed to nod. "I know, but it's too late for me. They're gonna get us both." "Not if I can help it," Jack shot back, his voice full of determination. As they rounded a corner, Jack heard a sharp crack, a gunshot. He ducked instinctively, dragging Jason behind a stack of crates for cover. The sound of running feet grew louder and Jack's mind raced. "Stay here," Jack whispered to Jason. "I'll take care of this." Jason looked up at him, panic in his eyes. "Jack, no. Don't go after them. It's suicide." But Jack wasn't listening. He knew that in this game hesitation meant death. He could hear their breath, their whispers, and the unmistakable sound of guns being cocked. His fingers brushed against the cold steel of his weapon. Time to face them head-on. The tension in the warehouse was suffocating as Jack prepared for the inevitable confrontation. He could hear the footsteps of his enemies approaching and he was ready. His mind was sharp, his senses heightened. The weight of his gun in his hand felt comforting. And then silence. Jack stood perfectly still, listening. No more footsteps. No more whispers. Suddenly, the lights above flickered, casting long shadows across the dimly lit room. Jack's eyes darted to the corner. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure Jack knew all too well. "Marcus," Jack growled, his voice laced with hatred. The man stepped forward, a smirk on his lips. "You think you can stop this, Jack? You think you can take down everything I've built? You're nothing but a pawn in a game you don't even understand." Jack's blood boiled. I'm not a pawn anymore, Marcus. This ends tonight. Marcus laughed. You think you're in control? You're just as much a part of this mess as I am. You always were. The two men stood face to face, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Jack's mind raced. Marcus was no longer the man he once knew. He was the embodiment of everything Jack had fought against. I didn't come here to make deals, Jack said, his voice firm. I came to end this. Marcus's expression shifted as Jack took a step closer. His eyes narrowed, and for a split second, the facade of arrogance slipped, revealing the man who was truly behind everything. Do you know who you're dealing with, Jack? Marcus asked, his voice low, almost too calm. Everything you've done, every step you've taken, it's all been part of my plan. Your betrayal, your vengeance, it was never about justice for you, was it? Jack froze. The words hit him harder than any bullet could. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice shaking with disbelief. Marcus smirked again. Vanessa. She was always working for me. Your little crusade against me? She set it all in motion. Jack's blood ran cold. Vanessa. His wife. The woman he trusted with his life. She had been the one pulling the strings all along. The shock of it hit him like a punch to the gut, but there was no time to process it. There was only the fire in his chest, burning brighter than ever. Jack turned toward the door, fury in his eyes. You'll regret this, he said, his voice full of venom. Marcus chuckled. Regret? I've been planning this for years, Jack. You were just a distraction. With a guttural snarl, Jack slammed the door behind him, his mind racing. Vanessa. She had known everything, and now Marcus was in control of it all. Jack could barely wrap his mind around the betrayal, but there was no time for emotions now. He needed answers. And he needed them fast. He glanced over at Jason, who was barely conscious, slumped against the crate. The wound on his side was worse than Jack had realized. Hang on, Jason, Jack muttered under his breath as he helped him to his feet. I need you to stay with me. Jason let out a weak laugh. You really think I can go anywhere right now? Jack didn't smile. His mind was already planning his next move. He couldn't let this happen again. Vanessa had betrayed him, but there was still something he needed from her. And he would get it, no matter the cost. As the sound of footsteps grew closer, Jack pulled Jason along with him, leading him through a narrow alleyway. Their escape had to be quick, but the danger was everywhere. They had no cover, no backup. The enemy was everywhere. But Jack had always thrived under pressure. He had always found a way out. The question was, would he survive long enough to get what he needed? The air was thick with tension as Jack guided Jason through the darkened streets, his mind racing. The discovery of Vanessa's betrayal still felt like a punch to the gut, but there was no time to process it. He had to survive first. He had to make sure Jason made it out alive. Where are we going? Jason asked weakly, his voice strained. Somewhere safe, Jack muttered, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. We can't trust anyone anymore. Jason's head lolled back as he fought to stay conscious. You're not going to just leave me here, are you? Jack didn't answer immediately. The question hit him harder than expected. No, he wasn't going to leave Jason behind. Jason had been loyal, and Jack couldn't just turn his back on him now. But the reality of their situation was dawning on him. Everyone he trusted had turned out to be a puppet of Marcus, and Vanessa's betrayal stung deeper than anything else. He remembered the nights they'd spent together, the promises they'd made, the love they'd shared. It was all gone now. It was all lies. They're gonna be looking for us, Jack said, pulling Jason closer to him. We can't keep running forever. We don't have to, Jason said through gritted teeth. I've got information on where they're hiding. But you need to get me to a hospital first. Jack's eyes narrowed as he processed Jason's words. Information. Sounded too good to be true. But Jack had no choice. The hospital could wait. He had to know what Jason knew. He had to end this. Without hesitation, he turned toward the abandoned building on the corner. We're getting that information and then we'll figure out the next move. Stay with me, Jason. Jason nodded weakly. You'll need to trust me, Jack. If we're going to take Marcus down, you can't be reckless. Jack's fingers tightened around his weapon. I don't plan on being reckless, but I won't stop until he's dead. They entered the abandoned building with caution, Jack's every instinct on high alert. The silence was deafening as they moved through the dimly lit corridors. The walls were cold and crumbling, the air musty. It was the perfect place for a trap. Jason was barely able to keep up. The blood from his side wound was dripping down, leaving a trail behind them. Jack's eyes darted around, searching for signs of movement, but it was eerily quiet. Too quiet. "I think this is it," Jason whispered, his voice hoarse. "The room where they're hiding." Jack pulled him closer. "If this is a trap, Jason, I swear to God." "It's not a trap." Jason snapped, his voice rising in panic. "This is the only place we can go. Trust me, I know this." Jack wasn't so sure. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing up, and every instinct screamed that something was off. Still, they couldn't afford to hesitate. Not now. The room they entered was large, sparsely furnished with dusty old furniture. There was a faint glow from a single light bulb hanging overhead. "Where's the information?" Jack demanded, his voice low and urgent. Jason pointed to a desk at the far corner of the room. "There. On that desk." Jack stepped forward, keeping a careful eye on the surroundings. As he approached the desk, the door slammed shut behind them, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Damn it!" Jack cursed, spinning around to face Jason. "You set us up." Jason's eyes were wide with fear. "I swear, Jack, I didn't." Before he could finish, a dozen armed men burst into the room, surrounding them. Jack's blood ran cold. It was a trap. And they had walked right into it. Jack's hand flew to his gun, but before he could draw, one of the men shoved him hard against the wall. The force knocked the wind out of him, but he quickly regained his stance, ready to fight. "Don't even think about it," the man growled, his finger itching to pull the trigger. Jack glared at him, his mind racing. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a nightmare, one he couldn't wake up from. The betrayal from every corner of his life had led him here, to this cold, heartless trap. Jason was pinned to the floor, his eyes wide with fear, but Jack couldn't afford to save him now. If he didn't get out, they'd both be dead. One of the men stepped forward, a sneer on his face. Jack's stomach twisted as he recognized him. "You think you can stop me, Jack?" Marcus's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long." Jack's heart skipped a beat as Marcus stepped into the light, his expression cold and calculating. "I don't know what you thought this was going to be," Marcus continued, "but it's over. You've lost." Jack took a slow breath, his eyes narrowing. "I haven't lost anything yet. You'll regret this, Marcus. I promise you." The gun pressed harder against his ribs. The sweat on Jack's brow was cold, but his voice didn't waver. "You may have control now, but you won't for long. I will make sure of that." Marcus's eyes flashed with anger. "You think you're the hero of this story, Jack? You're nothing. Just another man willing to die for his own stupid revenge." Jack's jaw clenched. "You're wrong," he growled. "I'm not a hero. But I'm damn sure not going down without a fight." The room was thick with tension, and Jack could feel the weight of every second dragging him toward his inevitable fate. Marcus's men were closing in, their guns aimed at him. The taste of betrayal was still fresh in his mouth, but his instincts screamed for action. He couldn't die here. Not like this. Not with everything still left to finish. Jason, barely conscious, struggled to move. Jack's eyes shot toward the desk where the encrypted files were sitting. That's the key. If he could just get to those files, everything would make sense. They might even have the leverage to escape. "You know what I don't get?" Marcus sneered, circling Jack like a predator. "You're still thinking about running? You really think you can escape all of this, Jack? You think you can still win?" Jack's gaze was cold, focused. He wasn't thinking about winning, he was thinking about surviving. "I don't need to win," Jack said through gritted teeth. "I just need to survive long enough to finish this." A small but crucial shift in the room happened. The men grew nervous and Jack could feel the hesitation in their posture. It was only a moment, but it was enough. Without warning, Jack lunged. He grabbed the closest man by the arm, twisting it behind his back before slamming him into the nearest wall. The gun went flying. He didn't have much time, he needed to move fast. "Jason, get up. Now," Jack shouted, pulling the injured man toward the desk. His fingers grasped the encrypted files. But Marcus was already shouting orders. "Take them down." Jack had no choice. It was now or never. The sound of gunshots echoed through the building, deafening as chaos erupted around them. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed Jason, dragging him toward the exit. The sound of their footsteps was drowned out by the chaos, and Jack could feel the weight of his decision, fight or flight. "Are you crazy?" Jason whispered, breathless. "You're gonna get us both killed?" "I'm not running anymore," Jack growled back, his teeth clenched. "If I die fighting." Another shot rang out. A bullet grazed Jack's arm and he winced in pain, but it only fueled his rage. The adrenaline coursing through his veins made the pain feel insignificant. "Get the files," Jack shouted to Jason as he took out another man who tried to block their path. The man dropped to the floor with a loud thud. The files were their ticket out, and Jason now had them clutched tightly in his hand. They reached the door. Jack kicked it open and pushed Jason outside. There was no time to look back. They had to go. The streets outside were eerily quiet, but Jack knew better than to feel safe. Marcus's men wouldn't give up this easily. The game had changed. But Jack wasn't running anymore. He had a plan, and the end of it was closer than ever. "Where to now?" Jason gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "We get back to my place," Jack said, determination in his voice. "I'll deal with Marcus later. But first we make sure we're both still breathing." The next few hours passed in a blur of noise and tension as Jack and Jason made their way through the back alleys of the city, hiding in shadows and avoiding the main streets. Jack's mind raced as he calculated their next move. The encrypted files could give them the leverage they needed, but it wouldn't be easy to decode them. Jason, though weak, had the files in his hand. He glanced at Jack, knowing they didn't have much time. "Jack, I need to tell you something," Jason said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "The information in these files, it's not just about Marcus. There's more. Something bigger. If we go after him, we might end up digging up more than we can handle." Jack shot him a sharp look. "What do you mean? You told me you could help us." "I can," Jason said, his gaze shifting nervously. "But Marcus isn't the only enemy. There are people above him, people you don't want to mess with. They're already watching us." Jack clenched his fists. He had no choice now. He'd made this far by trusting Jason, but this was bigger than both of them. "So what do we do?" Jack asked, his voice firm. "We make a deal," Jason said, hesitating. "But it'll be with the devil. It'll come at a price." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He'd already made enough deals with the devil, but there was no turning back. "What's the price?" Jason paused. "We'll need to work with someone who has their own agenda. Someone who can help us take down Marcus and everyone else behind him. But it won't come cheap. They'll want something in return." Jack didn't have time for moral dilemmas. If working with someone like that was the only option, he'd have to take it. "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it," Jack said. "First we survive." The city was quieter now, the streets deserted as the night crept in. Jack led Jason through a maze of alleys and hidden paths to a secluded building on the outskirts of town. It was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of a street lamp at the end of the block. "Who are we meeting here?" Jason asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Someone who knows how to get things done," Jack replied, his tone dark. They entered the building, the heavy door creaking open as Jack led Jason inside. The place smelled of must and decay. The shadows swallowed them whole as they moved deeper into the building. Jason's breath came in short bursts, and Jack could feel the tension growing between them. They reached a door at the end of the hallway. Jack knocked once, sharply. A moment later, the door creaked open and a figure stepped out of the shadows. "You're late," the man said, his voice smooth but edged with hostility. "I almost thought you wouldn't show up." Jack didn't flinch. "We're here. Now let's get to business." The man's eyes flicked over to Jason, his gaze cold. "I don't work with weaklings." Jason bristled, but Jack stepped in before he could say anything. "I'm here for the information. Nothing else." The man smiled faintly, his eyes glinting with something dangerous. "Information comes at a price." Jack felt his pulse quicken. He wasn't sure who this man was or what he wanted, but one thing was clear. He was dangerous. And trusting him would be the last thing he did if he had any choice. The dimly lit room felt colder now, as if the walls were closing in on Jack. The man standing before him wasn't just any ally, he was someone with his own agenda. Someone who had no qualms about playing both sides, and Jack could feel the danger in every word that came out of his mouth. You'll get the information you need, the man said, his voice as smooth as velvet. But you have to give me something in return. A trade if you will. Jack didn't trust him, he trusted no one. But his back was against the wall. He had to deal with this devil if he had any chance of saving his daughter and ending the nightmare Marcus had put him through. What do you want? Jack's voice was like steel, calm but threatening. The man smiled, showing too many teeth. I want leverage. Something Marcus would never expect. I want you to deliver something to him, something very valuable to him. And once that's done, you'll have your files and you'll be able to finish what you started. Jack's mind raced. The deal sounded risky, but the man wasn't lying. It was the only way to get Marcus to make a mistake. He could use that leverage to turn the tables. I'll do it, Jack said, eyes hardening. But when this is over, you stay out of my way. The man chuckled, clearly amused. We'll see about that. For now, you've made the right choice. Jack's gut twisted. But he couldn't back down. Not now. Jack spent the next few days preparing for his final confrontation with Marcus. The pieces were in place, he had the leverage and he knew the exact move he needed to make. But there was still something gnawing at him, something unsettled deep within. Jason, ever the reluctant ally, sat across from him in the safe house, staring at the encrypted files that could end it all. Are you sure about this, Jack? He asked, his voice laced with doubt. You're about to trade something precious to Marcus. What if it all goes wrong? Jack stared at the files. He wasn't sure, but he had to believe it was the right call. He couldn't afford to second-guess now. I don't have a choice, Jack said, his voice rough. It's all or nothing. Jason looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and fear. If this goes south, Marcus will come for you. He won't stop. I'll be ready, Jack replied coldly, standing up and walking toward the window. The skyline of the city stretched before him, a silent reminder of everything he was fighting for. Jack wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the truth, for the chance to protect his daughter. The past had shaped him into this moment and there was no turning back. Time to make the final move, Jack whispered to himself. The night was unusually quiet as Jack and Jason made their way toward the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Jack's pulse raced with anticipation. This was it, the moment he'd been planning for. It wasn't going to be easy, but he couldn't afford failure. Jason, looking hesitant, glanced at Jack. Are you really ready for this? Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled the small device from his jacket pocket. The tracker was active. Marcus wouldn't know they were coming until it was too late. Ready as I'll ever be, Jack said grimly. Once we hand over what Marcus wants, he'll make his move. And that's when we strike. They reached the warehouse and found it eerily empty. The air was thick with the smell of rust and old machinery, and the faint echo of their footsteps seemed too loud in the quiet. Jack scanned the room, his mind working on overdrive. He was outnumbered, but he had the advantage of surprise. And then the door creaked open. Marcus stepped in, his cold eyes immediately locking onto Jack's. There was no greeting, no pretenses. You came alone? Marcus said, his tone mocking. You've got guts, I'll give you that. I'm here for my daughter, Marcus, Jack said, his voice low and steady. Give me the files and we'll call it even. Marcus chuckled. You think this is about the files? You think you've won? Before Jack could respond, the door slammed shut behind him. The trap had been set. Suddenly, a dozen of Marcus's men emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. Jack's heart raced, but he didn't flinch. His mind was already calculating his next move. Now! Jack shouted to Jason, who had been hiding behind a pile of crates. The device Jack had set earlier was activated, sending a signal to the file's location. Jason knew the code and, without hesitation, began to hack the system. The standoff had begun. Jack had no more room to run. It was all or nothing now. You'll never win, Jack, Marcus sneered, stepping closer. You're just one man. But Jack wasn't just one man. He was a father, a soldier, and a man driven by revenge. His heart was racing, but his mind was calm, focused. We'll see about that, Jack said, his voice colder than ice. The sound of heavy boots echoed off the cold concrete floor of the warehouse as the last of Marcus's men circled Jack. Sweat clung to his forehead, but his eyes remained locked on Marcus, who stood just a few paces away, a cold smirk playing on his lips. "Do you know how this ends, Jack?" Marcus taunted, his voice calm despite the chaos. "You'll never leave this place alive. No one does. And as for your daughter, well, she's already a pawn in my game." Jack's heart hammered in his chest, but his expression remained stoic. The truth was, he was done with this. He was done running. Done trying to find ways to make peace with a man who couldn't be reasoned with. "I didn't come here for you, Marcus," Jack said, his voice low but fierce. "I came for her." His words cut through the air like a blade. Marcus's smirk faltered for a second, his cold eyes flickering with irritation. "You think you're the hero here? You think you can save her?" Jack didn't respond. He didn't need to. Instead, he nodded at Jason, who was still in the corner, feverishly working on the laptop. The files were almost ready to be decrypted, and once that happened, Marcus's empire would come crashing down. Jack turned back to Marcus, who was pacing now, clearly growing impatient. "You have one last chance," Marcus sneered. "Give me the leverage you brought, or your daughter suffers." Jack felt the weight of his daughter's life hang in the balance. His fingers clenched into fists, and for a moment, it felt like time slowed down. But he remembered everything he'd gone through, the years of pain, the rage burning deep inside him. This moment wasn't just for him. It was for every life Marcus had destroyed. It was for his daughter, and for all the others who had been victims of this monster. "I'm not backing down," Jack said, his voice steady. "Not now. Not ever." Suddenly, the sound of sirens blared outside. Jack could hear the distant wail of police cars coming closer. It was his final chance. His last move. But as the sirens grew louder, so did the tension in the air. Marcus's eyes widened as he realized the tables were turning. The leverage, the files, it was all slipping through his fingers. "You thought you controlled this, Marcus," Jack muttered, his voice a cold whisper. "But you never did." With a swift motion, Jack lunged forward, using his last ounce of strength to knock Marcus's gun out of his hand. The fight was brutal, a blur of fists and rage. Jack could feel the weight of the years he'd spent in anger and loss fueling every punch. This was it, the final battle. And in the end, Marcus, the man who had destroyed so many lives, was now at Jack's mercy. But Jack didn't kill him. Instead, he stood over him, breathing heavily. "You'll rot in prison for the rest of your life." The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind. The police arrested Marcus, his empire crumbling into nothingness. Jack had finally brought down the man who had stolen so much from him, from his daughter, and from so many others. But despite his victory, a gnawing emptiness lingered. Nothing could bring back the years of pain. Nothing could erase the scars. Jack stood in his daughter's room, watching her sleep. She was safe now, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Jack allowed himself to feel a flicker of peace. He'd done it. He had saved her. But the price of that victory was heavy. It was a weight he would carry with him for the rest of his life. As he sat down beside her, he couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. All the pain, the rage, the darkness, it had led him to this moment. But now, as he looked at his daughter, he knew it wasn't the end. This story wasn't over. It couldn't be. He reached for his phone, pulling up the file Jason had given him. The encrypted data was open now, and there was one last thing left to do. He clicked on a message from an unknown source. It was a warning. "If you think Marcus was the only one pulling the strings, you're wrong. The real danger is still out there." Jack's blood ran cold. The nightmare wasn't over. With one last look at his daughter, Jack knew that his fight wasn't finished. The next battle would be even more dangerous, but he would face it head-on. Because when you've lost everything, there's nothing left to fear. That. Or is it? Before you go, if you've made it this far, thank you for joining Jack on this intense, action-packed journey. But here's the thing. This story isn't just over, there are more secrets to uncover. More battles to fight. Do you think Jack will find peace? Or will the darkness continue to follow him? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts and predictions for what might come next. If you enjoyed this thriller, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more heart-racing stories. Trust me, the next one is going to be even more intense. Stay tuned for the next thrilling adventure, coming soon. Until then, keep your thoughts sharp and your heart steady.